Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. My name is Matthew Hall and my co-host today is Alysha Pannu. Hello, Alysha.
Hello, Matthew.
Today's episode is How is AI changing the practice of antitrust law? A discussion with Daniel Schwarz of CompetitionAI. Daniel is a co-founder of CompetitionAI, an agentic AI platform focused on antitrust and competition law, as well as FDI, or foreign direct investment control. He was previously a competition lawyer at Clifford Chance in London, as well as a counsel at the IMF in Washington, D.C. Hello, Daniel, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. I gave a bit of an introduction there, but could you please tell us a bit more about yourself and why you started CompetitionAI?
So I am a very proud antitrust nerd. I spent 10 years as an associate at CC and at the IMF in Washington, as you mentioned. And I first fell in love with antitrust when I was doing my economics undergraduate degree. So I've been obsessed with competition law since I was very young. I thought I was going to be doing it for the next 40 years of my life. And then I was working on a deal, which we were waiting for it to proceed. And I had a bit of time on my hands. And I thought I should investigate this ChatGPT that everyone was talking about at the time. And so I started looking into it in more detail. And I soon became obsessed. I became obsessed with AI when I realized that so much of what we do as antitrust lawyers can be radically improved if you understand antitrust, if you understand AI, if you understand the key work that we do, and we could just make the whole practice of antitrust so much better by using AI. So I teamed up with some amazing AI software engineers these are guys who really push the frontiers of what you can do with AI. And we launched CompetitionAI. As you say, it's an antitrust platform based on AI for antitrust lawyers. And so now we're working with some of the really big, prestigious antitrust practices in the world, and we're building key tools just for antitrust lawyers.
That's great. So you've given a bit of a prelude into what competition AI is, but could you perhaps tell us in a bit more detail what competition AI does and how it's different from other AI platforms?
Sure. So competition AI is really a group of AI tools, each designed specifically for antitrust lawyers. So it focuses on merger control, FDI, filings, behavioral investigations at each stage of the process, whether it's FDI, identifying filings, document review, all of these kind of big things that we work on as antitrust lawyers. And everything is, as I say, AI obsessively focused on antitrust lawyers, how antitrust lawyers think. What do we do? What are our instincts? What do we want to see at each different stage? What is the logic behind what we do as an antitrust lawyer? And when we're building it, really, it's kind of like glimpsing into the soul of an antitrust lawyer. What would the antitrust lawyer do at this exact moment? What would they want to see? What would be most useful? And so, whereas other more generalist tools take a generalist AI platform and they try to squeeze antitrust workflows into that generalized tool, we built tools which start with antitrust and build AI software around that. And the reason is, what we do as antitrust lawyers is different. It's unique. You wouldn't get a tax lawyer to draft an HSR form. You wouldn't get an IP lawyer to advise on a cartel, because what antitrust is special. And it takes several years, often 10 years, in order for an attorney to get to the skills and qualifications needed to actually run a deal independently. And so what we do is really specialized. And so the AI tools need to be specialized as well. And it's not just about the AI tools and the platform that we've built, it's also the kind of support and what you can do with that. So when building our platform, there's kind of two sides of it. One is the tools themselves. And the second side of it is actually the commercial drivers. How can law firms, antitrust teams use this in order to win new clients, reduce write-offs, improve client loyalty? And so a lot of our tools focuses on really like the economics of an antitrust practice. So almost like we've done like a market study just on what it's like being an antitrust lawyer trying to win new clients and seeing, well, how can we improve that using AI? So for example, one of the things we've got is we have a tool which has AI-driven feedback loops. So the more you advise a client on a particular issue, you're in a much better position to advise the client on the future in new issues, because the AI tool remembers the work that you've done and the documents, and so you're in a better position than other law firms. And so that kind of drives client loyalty. So there's the AI tools, there's the commercial drivers, there's also trying to find ways that we can get the law firms to bring in their own know-how and expertise, what makes those law firms special, and bring that into the platform. And also trying to think about, well, what new services, what new antitrust services can law firms give to their clients that weren't really possible before AI. So really trying to imagine, what does the antitrust practice look like in the age of AI?
So Daniel, that's great overall explanation. Just a scoping question. Are you covering UK, EU, or are you covering the world as well?
We want the world. And actually, a lot of what we do as antitrust lawyers are principles based, where the principles are similar across the UK, the EU, the US, all over the place. And then, so I think we have two kinds of tools. One is we focus on very specific jurisdictions. So where a jurisdiction takes a particular approach, we have to amend our tools so they actually link in with the nuance of that jurisdiction. And then more generalist tools, which actually apply the kind of more broadly applicable antitrust principles, which are relevant for each jurisdiction.
Okay, and you mentioned you're antitrust specific, and you made a lot of good comments about that, which makes sense. Of course, you compete with probably tools such as Harvey, Lagora, not to mention the generics. Certainly, Harvey, as I understand it, for example, is built on top of, if you like, standard LLMs and has kind of programs running on top of that. Is that basically how competition AI is set up? It's sitting on top of an LLM, or is it, if you like, completely trained on something else?
So we are completely different to Harvey and Lagora, and actually most of the law firms that use us already have access to Harvey and Lagora, and we actually get much more demand from law firms who already have access to them because they can actually see the differences. And so even though you're right, we both use large language models, just like all AI companies do. The difference, well, there's a few differences, but the key thing is because we are obsessively focused on antitrust lawyers, we have built whole new AI infrastructure, mechanisms, workflows, everything start to finish around the unique ways that antitrust do lawyers. Whereas those other platforms, which have to cater to tax lawyers, IP lawyers, litigation lawyers, corporate lawyers, and actually, like, there's way more corporate lawyers and litigation lawyers than antitrust lawyers. And so they're much more geared towards their customers, which is generally not antitrust. And so that's why we are very different. And that's why most law firms who have access to a generalist tool also choose us.
So Daniel, you've been doing competition AI for a few years now. And of course, over the last few years, or even it seems like on a month-to-month basis, there's new developments in AI. How has the use of AI changed for you, for competition AI, over the last few years, and how are law firms using it today?
So I think there's been a few different phases. I think in the first phase, or at least as soon as ChatGPT came out, lots of antitrust lawyers were very curious. There was some skepticism, which I think actually was quite right, partly due to hallucinations, but also we didn't really know at the time how good the AI technology was going to get. And at that stage, the technology wasn't good enough. So initially there was, I'd say, curiosity, but then skepticism. And then there was a period from around 18 months to a year ago where you had everyone wanted to say to their clients they were using AI, but actually, and give the appearance of it. But actually, if you'd say, well, give me 3 very specific ways in which you're using AI and that's having a material impact on your practice, it wasn't significant. That period is over. And now I think competition teams in big law firms, in-house, and also increasingly in the antitrust authorities themselves are now using AI much more significantly. The demand that we see from law firms is so much greater than it was before to actually use AI in a really material way. And I think partly that's client driven. You see many, many clients are really insisting on it, and insisting not just on like a kind of generalist tick box exercise of are you using AI, but actually in a really granular way, how are you using AI and what are the impacts going to be? And I hear people who are winning and losing clients as a result of that. So that's changed. But I think one of the things that's also changed is, as you mentioned, Alysha, the AI tools and the large language models themselves are so much better than they were before. It is astonishing how good they are. And therefore, what we can do as an antitrust lawyers is so much better than it was before. And so people are doing much more interesting things. So I think people are doing more interesting things, but at the same time, they are sometimes struggling because, one, we don't have time, because antitrust lawyers are super busy working on the deals that they're doing. You don't have spare time for anything in life, let alone, families and hobbies and things like that. So finding extra time to do investment in AI is difficult. Secondly, they're not AI companies themselves. They don't have that institutional expertise. And thirdly, sometimes they're pushed to use a tool which actually has nothing to do with antitrust. And so they kind of struggle to get much value out of that. So I think people are starting to use it much more. There's much more excitement. There are some barriers to adoption. And there's a lot going on under the surface that I can't really talk about on a podcast. But you can see that some antitrust teams are very ambitious, doing very big things, and are leaning into this pretty quickly. So I think fairly soon you're going to hear a lot more about this in public.
So without mentioning those kind of things, Daniel, looking out 2 to 5 years, I mean, you're obviously right at the cutting edge of this, particularly on the antitrust front. How do you see it changing over that time?
So when ChatGPT first came out, I was actually quite a skeptic. I used to see adverts for toothbrushes which claimed to use AI, and I thought the whole thing was a gimmick. And then even after I first used ChatGPT, I didn't realize how good it would be. I was completely wrong. The quality of the AI tools today, or at least the large language models themselves on which all those tools are built on, is astonishing. And the idea that these are going to get even better is really quite shocking. So this is going to change both the way that we do antitrust and also the markets which antitrust is applied to. So I think if you think about the production line of antitrust, the series of events, I think you can really see the scope. So we're going to see in the detection of antitrust issues, you're going to see the competition authority, or in competition litigation practices, identifying far more antitrust breaches, whether it's by monitoring more communications, by looking at what's going on in M&A, etc. So stuff is going to be identified using AI. Then, once it's been identified, the market's going to be analyzed using AI, not exclusively with AI, but using AI. Then RFIs are going to be generated using AI, and it's going to be sent to the client. The in-house team is going to see that. They're going to then look in their internal documents at everything that's been written about on the subject, using AI to read those documents. Then they're going to see what they've got. Then they're going to go externally to their law firm. Their law firm is going to look at every single precedent for this. They're going to see what theories of harm they could be looking at using AI. And then they're going to be responding to the RFI using AI. So if you look at all the value chain, at every different stage, AI is going to be part of that. And I think in the same way that banks started to look more like fintechs as technology improved in the kind of 2010s, you're going to start to see the same thing with law firms. And if you think about, e-discovery is only like 20 years old. And now it's huge, and you've got billion-dollar companies. Economics consultancies, at least in Europe, didn't used to be nearly as big as they used to be. And partly that's because computing and technology and data is more available. And so I think in the same way that we see previous generations of technology shift have led to a change in not just the issues that we analyze as antitrust lawyers, but the way that we practice, I think you're going to see the same thing with AI. But AI is like another level in the way that the first time it can actually do similar analysis that a lawyer can actually do. And so I was previously very skeptical. It's not going to be done. These things aren't going to be done exclusively with AI, but there's going to be a huge amount, and it's going to touch every aspect of what we do as antitrust lawyers.
So it sounds like the use of these AI tools will really increase, productivity for competition practices at law firms. It'll really also increase efficiency for the enforcers as well in terms of how they go about their reviews and their investigations. So on that topic, there's been a lot of discussion or concern about AI replacing lawyers. Do you think that's a legitimate concern?
So I think, again, I take this as an antitrust lawyer who's used to doing market studies and market investigations, where you have to take a very granular microeconomic approach to all the different markets. And I think antitrust the market for antitrust services is different to other areas of law. And so we need to look at it in itself. So I think one of the things that makes antitrust different is antitrust is often driven by lots of events, and those events are going to happen much more because of AI. So for example, it's often competition authority driven. So when you've got competition authorities who are also using AI, who are dramatically more productive, who want to be doing more enforcement, who often have to close cases because they don't have the resources, there's going to be doing much more enforcing. They're going to be doing much more detecting. And I think actually fundamentally, most information exchange infringements generally go undetected. It's generally in casual settings. People don't monitor them. They're in emails, which do not get escalated to the antitrust teams. And so that's going to change. So you're going to have much more competition authority enforcement. You're going to have much more information exchange and cartels being detected. You're also going to have much more M&A activity. So the costs of doing due diligence and the speed which you can do diligence is going to absolutely be transformed when you have AI that can read 10,000 documents in a couple of hours. So it's going to be much easier for people looking to acquire other companies to actually do very rigorous due diligence on target companies. And as we know, like when you do more due diligence, when you consider acquiring more companies, you have to call in antitrust lawyers in order to do their service. Where you're going to have to file, what are going to be the antitrust risks? And then AI, like all big technology shift, is probably going to lead to lots of antitrust activity itself. So if you put all of that together, I think what we get is the demand for antitrust services is going to massively increase. But as you say, there are some tasks which AI or technology is going to be able to do the first pass of. So I think realistically, large-scale document review, or at least the first pass of it, is going to be done with AI. AI is incredibly good at doing document review, and that's just today. The technology does not need to get any better in order for AI to be able to handle the first pass review of documents. You can see lots of different statistics and reports on that. So I think that's probably going to go away, and the demand for people doing that initially. And I think the other thing is we can't talk about AI without being very conscious of the huge risks of using it and using it improperly. So and that means that really AI isn't going to replace lots of lawyers. So you always have to check everything. You always have to conduct independent analysis. You can't over-rely on it. And I think one of the advantages of AI is it gets you to the right information faster, but it's not a replacement for that human lawyering. And so clients who are already willing to pay huge amounts of money for the most accurate quality antitrust advice are going to keep doing that. And it's not going to be enough to just rely on AI. We are always going to need those antitrust lawyers. So I think there is going to be some things which are done increasingly by AI, or at least parts of it. But fundamentally, the huge increase in demand for antitrust services and the need to have antitrust advisors is going to mean antitrust lawyers are going to have long careers.
Quite reassuring, I think, at this stage, Daniel. But what about, I mean, you mentioned there clients are going to continue to be willing to pay a lot of money for top antitrust advice. But what about the junior level? You also mentioned document review. You know, a lot of the discussion is about junior lawyers being replaced and what happens when all the senior lawyers have, retired. So what do you see about that issue?
So I think that the way that we used to learn how to be antitrust lawyers is basically we used to be given a task, and we used to be given a set of instructions, and we'd go away and we'd do that, and it would take us several hours. Then we come back and we get some feedback, and you learn by being copied in on emails, and you kind of learn via osmosis. And that was useful. And the only way that you could actually get work done initially was by a human doing it. And there was this positive externality whereby the work didn't just get done, but also the lawyer got trained in the process. But that training process was actually very slow. I mean, we've all done a horrific number of document review on the weekends. And I'm not saying you don't learn anything. You do actually learn stuff, but you do learn it very slowly. It's a very inefficient way of learning, reviewing documents late at midnight. And so I think AI is increasingly going to be doing the first draft of things. And there is that question of, well, if AI is doing the first draft, well, if that's not the junior lawyer, how are they going to learn? And so
Or
I
how
think
they're going to be needed as well. Isn't that the question? I mean, if they're not there, they can't learn, but you may not need them at all, right?
so. I think they're going to be needed because, firstly, as I said, you need human lawyers to review everything, and you can't over rely on AI. I think, secondly, we need to get much better at training junior lawyers. So I think we're going to increasingly move to the apprenticeship model, where instead of just kind of learning subtly by osmosis, law firms invest much more in their training programs. And I think actually, in the same way that you can build AI tools that embed antitrust analysis into processes, you can actually do the same thing with training. So we need to use AI not just to help us as antitrust lawyers, but also to train the next generation of antitrust lawyers. And what that's going to mean is that antitrust lawyers learn much faster. They become much more useful much faster, more senior much faster, and therefore we'll want them, even though their kind of years of experience might be lower, their productivity will be much greater. And I think there's also an opportunity for junior lawyers who, when you've been doing antitrust for a long time or anything, you have a set way of doing things. And it's hard to sometimes reimagine that using AI or fit the new technologies. But actually, genuinely AI native junior lawyers have the opportunity to bring something really quite new to the table, something quite fresh, and to help people who are more experienced to actually find new ways and better ways of doing things with the new technology. So I think it's a risk, but ultimately we have to be conscious. But I think we all have a responsibility to the next generation to invest more in training, and the returns from that training are going to be much, much greater if we actually genuinely invest in junior lawyers' careers.
So it sounds like you think at least the far-sighted and maybe more deep-pocketed firms will be able to, or should be, continuing to invest in junior lawyers and just making sure that they are taking advantage of AI, or AI is helping to train them up as well. I take your point about them teaching them more senior lawyers how to use it as well, but that seems to be your kind of view on that.
Well, I think if you start from the proposition that we are always going to need antitrust lawyers and we're always going to need good ones, then where are they going to come from? Either you have to recruit them at more junior levels, train them up, and then get them to the stage. Or what you do is you say, I'm not going to recruit any, I'm just going to hire them at a later stage. And then you end up paying even more. You have people who you lose your firm culture, and you actually lose what's really special about you as a firm. And so I think actually we're still going to need junior lawyers. In some ways, they're going to have better careers because they might be doing a bit less of the really onerous tasks of just like horrific document review. But I think we're going to get there eventually.
Well, I'm sure junior lawyers will be relieved to hear your view on this. I'm interested to hear, Daniel, on your thoughts on how AI will affect or impact in-house lawyers and how they operate.
So, when I've worked in-house and advised in-house teams, a lot of what you do is traditionally it's ensuring compliance of people with antitrust rules, whether you have guidelines, you have your training, you respond to questions from people in your team. Now, what's going to change is that instead of just having a human workforce, one of the things that the CEO of NVIDIA says is that we're going to have a digital workforce. So it's going to have both humans and AI agents. And the result of that means that it's not just your human employees who have to comply with antitrust. It's also those AI agents. So you're going to have to train those agents on what the antitrust rules are, how they comply. You can't have your agents speaking to competitors and sharing CSI and doing all those kind of things. The company is still going to be liable for it. And so you're going to have to train those agents. You're going to have to be able to monitor those agents. You're going to have escalation programs, and you're going to have a whole kind of parallel compliance program. So the way that we get our agents to comply with antitrust is going to be a whole new thing for in-house lawyers. The second thing is there's going to be, I think, much more use of AI tools to ensure the compliance of your human workforce. So previously you couldn't monitor all communications because it wasn't plausible, and there's also ethical considerations. But increasingly, if you can do AI to do that cheaply and efficiently, if you're in an industry with high antitrust risk, you can see why actually that might be a prudent policy. So there's going to be a whole other kinds of compliance programs. I think we're also going to see some more pressure on in-house teams to do more work. internally instead of sending it externally. And some say, well, if we have AI tools that make us more efficient, then we don't have to send as much work out. Sometimes, when you're in-house, you send work externally for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's just because you have huge tasks and you don't have enough people. Well, if you have AI agents, then maybe you can do some more of that in-house. But again, you always need human lawyers. And so that only gets you so far. I also think that the nature of in-house antitrust practices is that actually most in-house teams generally have very few or very small teams of antitrust lawyers. It's generally between 1 and 10. So if you're trying to buy a new AI tool, it's actually much harder for you than if you're a much bigger team, like a corporate team internally. And so, because you have to go through data security, you have to go through procurement, all those kind of things, even if that tool could be really useful. So I think we might get to a stage where the bigger teams, like that you see in law firms, have access to more antitrust-specific AI tools, which are really productivity enhancing. And so you might see that actually in-house teams give work externally to law firms, not just because they're great law firms, but also because they have access to certain AI tools that they don't have in-house.
That makes sense, Daniel. Are you, without giving anything away that you don't want to, are you currently selling or seeing demand from in-house teams for competition AI?
So we do see demand from in-house teams. We are speaking to some customers there. We started with law firms because they actually have bigger antitrust teams typically. And especially because some of our tools are more connected to M&A deals and the antitrust that come out of that, which is done less often in-house. It's just less regular. But we are seeing demand from in-house lawyers as well.
You mentioned most companies have a small in-house antitrust. I mean, in my experience, virtually no companies have, well, the vast majority of companies have no dedicated antitrust lawyer at all. Only the largest ones really do. So presumably what you're largely seeing is in-house lawyers who are generalists, using generic tools, maybe Harvey if they have it, and then going to external antitrust counsel to, if you like, check difficult things, ask for confirmation of, initial research, that kind of thing.
So I think if you want to take what is your average in-house antitrust lawyer doing with AI and which tools are they using, I think often they're not legal specific tools, or generally I'd say more likely than not, they're not legally specific tools. They are often general tools which have been procured for the entire organization, which will be a mixture of Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Claude. Occasionally you get legal specific tools. It also depends on the size of the in-house legal team. So if you have a very big legal team, it's much easier for them to procure legal specific tools. But also like the generalist legal specific tools often actually do very similar things to the generalist non-legal specific tools. So it doesn't make a huge amount of difference if you're comparing one generalist tool to another.
Yeah, so someone using Gemini in-house may be getting a similar result to someone using Harvey in-house if they have access to that. Finally, on the substance here, Daniel, you mentioned a bit about competition authorities, detecting M&A, detecting infringements, etc., even drafting RFIs, etc. Do you have any further comments on how competition authorities will develop their use of these types of AI tools that you're developing, and what this means for law firms responding on the other side?
So I think what I see is that competition authorities both have the ability and the incentive to be using AI lots more. So in terms of the incentive, so they are often resource constrained. The more enforcing they can do, in order to the extent that it actually benefits consumers, the more enforcement they could do, the better. The CMA put out some statistics which said that for every £1 spent, they have a £23 return for consumers. And what they end up doing a lot of the time is they see, well, there could potentially be a lot of harm in this case, but we have to close it on the basis of administrative priority. So the more cases where they don't have to close, if they have to close fewer cases due to administrative priority, then actually they can have more benefits to consumers. So they have massive incentives to actually do more with AI. And, the CMA was on a financial services investigation a couple of years ago, and this is all public. And it took several years, and there was something like, I think 4 to 5 million pounds was the cost, and they reviewed 2 million documents. Now, as I said, AI is so good at reviewing documents. Now, you wonder how much time and cost could have been saved if it had today's technology. And if so, whether they'd be able to pursue, there are whole other antitrust investigations which would have gone on if it wasn't for that. So they massively have an incentive to do this. In terms of the ability, there can be some difficulties in terms of what do you do with the data? Where does it go? Because you have public responsibilities in terms of who it can be shared with, and there can be some nervousness about which cloud platforms you send your data to. But actually, a lot of them already have big data teams. They have a huge amount of data themselves on previous decisions, which they could be using in order to get better. They have huge amounts of expertise as well. Their incentive, I've already spoken about the incentive, but their ability is also improved by the fact that they can be very focused, and also their scale. So if you think about a big AI investment, it's almost like lots of other bits of technology, whereby in order to kind of build the infrastructure, in order to accelerate or improve a process, that can be a significant cost. But the more you do of that process, the lower the cost per each time it's used. And because competition authorities do a huge number of deals or a huge number of investigations and go through these processes, and they know they're going to be doing this over a longer period of time, actually the return on investment is much greater. And so I think we're going to be seeing, again, just like in-house and in law firms, humans and AI agents, you're also going to be having these huge teams of AI agents working in competition authorities, and they're going to be able to continuously monitor markets for antitrust risk. They're going to be continuously being able to get information from consumers. There was a thing where a guy, he used AI to call 300 people to find out the price of a pint of beer in an area and used it to create a benchmark. Now, imagine if a competition authority could do that, and they could do that continuously as much as they like. So you can see how, if you can continuously monitor markets, if you can analyze text or markets much more easily, and also if you are doing things with a pattern, you can train your own AI or algorithms. The competition authority can do a huge amount, and I'm already hearing, and again, I can't talk about details, but a huge amount that's going on under the surface. Now, funny enough, when you speak to law firms, they are often very interested in what their competitors are doing, and no one wants to be left behind. But one of the things that I think isn't quite appreciated is that I'm already seeing lots of competition authorities who are moving ahead of many big law firms. And so I think there's one risk about moving slower than your rival law firms. There's another big risk about competition authorities who are able to analyze data or have insights from an investigation, which you as a law firm don't have because you haven't yet made those AI investments. So I think that dynamic with competition authorities really moving ahead is something which is a risk which is being underappreciated.
That's an interesting point, Daniel. Before we move to the end segments here, I just want to mention for listeners that we've looked at similar issues to this in a couple of previous episodes. Firstly, number 86 with Stephen Hunt, who was formerly at the UK CMA, and number 358 with Todd Davies, who's a PhD researcher, again on similar issues. So, Daniel, thank you very much. Super interesting conversation and insights. As I mentioned, you're really at the cutting edge of this issue. We like to finish off with some personal questions. You told us you're a long-time listener, so you'll know all about this. But firstly, could you please tell us something interesting or unusual about yourself that we wouldn't know if we only worked with you professionally?
So nowadays, I have two things in my life. One is talking about AI and antitrust, which is most of my life. And then the other thing is I've got 3 little kids that I spend my rest of my life running around chasing. But before I fell in love with antitrust and economics, I used to have long blonde hair, a bandana and a guitar, and I thought my band was going to make it. And so if I wasn't doing this, I probably would have been a guitarist.
So is this a rock band or something else?
Yeah, we were called the Ocean. Me and some friends. We, as you can tell by the fact that I launched CompetitionAI, we didn't actually go global, but we were very popular in some bars in North London.
Well, maybe return to it at some point. That's great. We now like to have our segment, The Curious Hat.
And now it's time for The Curious Hat!
So I'm going to just pluck out the question from our Curious Hat for you, Daniel. So Daniel, if you were given $50,000 on the condition that you had to spend it all in 1 hour, what would you purchase?
$50,000 in 1 hour.
Apart from 2 tokens from ChatGPT.
If I have £50,000 and 1 hour to spend it, I think I would use the money to bribe my children to sleep for longer, because you know there's you hear about all these things about the CEO getting up at 5 a.m., going to the gym and going swimming, and then being at their desk at 6 a.m. Mine is running after little kids, so I bribe them to stay in their beds.
I can totally commiserate with that right now, Daniel, what I would get for more sleep. So that sort of caps off this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and join us next week for another exciting episode.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.